Alright, the game is 1853. This is an 18XX game. But it is one of the weirdest XX games I've seen. First of all, it's not from that 1830 lineage. It's more from the 1829 lineage, which means you have just straight stock tracks. Now, in each case, actually, these are segmented by company for some reason. It does give you the order of play, though, kind of nicely. The companies are going to always play in this order. What else does it have? It's got multiple gauges of track, which is... This is the only game that I've seen that has that, but I know some of the later ones do. Which means that there are tons and tons of track hexes in this game, because they have to account for not just all the types that you're used to, but all the types that you're used to in different gauges. There is a very interesting track upgrade chart, which allows you to turn boinker doinkers, the small towns, into cities, and maybe get rid of them and such not. Basically, if you want to try to do something, sometimes you can be very confused, because if you're not absolutely used to this design, and I sure the hell am not, and will never be, you look towards something and you say, I can go to double track. This will be double grade. It's both narrow gauge and normal city. And then that way I can convert so that I can switch in and out of different things. Well, once you make that decision, you've kind of skewed decisions later down the road as to where you can go with that track. And you just have to really kind of... You're going to have to be referring to this a lot once upgrades become available. Before they become available, it's probably not too big a deal. It's got a concept of major companies and minor companies. But these aren't minor companies like in 1835. These are full-fledged share corporations. The difference being that major corporations will have 2 home bases, and they can lay track out of each of them under certain restrictions. One of the weirdest... It's got a number of weird things in it, which we'll touch on as we go through it, but I just want to catch a couple of those for XX players who haven't played before. One of the weirdest things, first of all, one of the players gets the option to add extra operating rounds if he likes. Just one each time in between each stock round. So unlike the normal progression here, you'll have the you'll start off with a stock round, go through operating rounds, however many you're supposed to go through based on the phase, and then the guy with priority deal gets to choose, hey, do I want another operating round? Do I need to squeeze a few more bucks out? The bank pool has no limit. In fact, you can sell your presidency. It is possible to rape companies in this game, but it's not necessarily that terrible for the other players. If they've been making money along with you, they're fine. They can just divest themselves of stocks along with you. And then, one of the biggest things in it, well, it also has this really skewed player chart. And what you'll see here is it changes the percentage needed to float a company, changes the amount of money, but it's kind of random, the amount of money. So like in 1830, you have X amount of money and you divide it up. Hey, and it's easy to extend the game. You could make it an 8-player game if you want, or a 2-player game. There might be problems with those solutions, but 2-player actually works very nicely as a learning game. Well, with this, oh look, in 6, each player gets 510 pounds. In 5, they each get 570. In 4, they each get 570. What's going on here? Number of shares needed to float mixes around to it. So there's a lot of little tweaks going on in all directions. Your total certificate limit that you're able to hold. I'm sorry, this is number of shares you're allowed to hold in a company, which matches, except in the case of 4 players, the number of certificates you're allowed, the number of shares you're allowed to hold in a company. Very, very weird stuff going on here. What's this? This is how you deal out the money, the division of the money. You've got trains for the 2 different gauges of track. You've got weird little trains that can be one of 2 different things, and strangely you have them duplicated in case they can't be both of those things. You got these mats for the different corporations. And on the mat, you got room for your money, you got room for your train, you got room for your tokens. You got all the phase change information repeated on every company. Okay, guess that's helpful. You have the track building costs, okay? The terrain on the board is going to cost you penalties, and instead of just putting the penalties right on the board for a cost, well, because we have 2 different kinds of track, the narrow gauge pays less when it faces certain kinds of track than the normal gauge, and you've got that copied out on every one. And then you've got this weird little picture, which essentially tells you where your company is meant to operate. And there are limitations that apply to your corporation if it tries to go outside of that area. And we'll touch on those in a bit. All right. And then the final and the weirdest thing is the first thing you do in the game at all, which is buying. It's taking an initial bond on your entry into India, essentially. You're going to be forced, and there's a little chart, but it's not on the board, to bid a certain number of cities that you'll hook up together, okay? You got to put some cash aside for those cities, and that allows you to play. And only the corporations that people... So what happens is people take shares for each of those cities, and only the corporations people take shares for those cities actually are available in the stock round until all of those shares are sold out, and then a second wave of corporations comes in. So it's kind of got that 1835 feel of we got one wave of corporations and another, but the players control what they're going to be, and they control it through this bond mechanism. They pay cash. They have to pick a certain number of cities. They can pick more than that number. There's a maximum limit. But they don't get these shares for free. They still have to pay for the shares. In addition to the bond will be returned to them when they hook up their cities. All right, let's take a look at how the rules actually hold up. And the rules are not good. This is the Lookout Games version where the rules were tremendously cleaned up. I can remember the original version. They were hell. But these aren't that good either. Largely because they don't bother to look into, hey, I'm an XX player. Keep me from making any pitfalls. And I tried to catch some of those there. Okay. So, all right, let's begin with that contract. At the beginning of the game, you're going to be selecting a number of cities, and you're limited by the number of players you are to how many cities you have to pick. So in a 3-player game, you have to pick between 4 to 6. In a 6-player game, which is what I'm going to do, against some advice, it's 3 to 4 cities. You pick those cities, and what you do, you sort of pick them notionally in your mind and come up with a bid that you're going to make, or a bond that you're going to make. And that bond is going to equal the cost, the value of those cities for connections. So like this would be a $30 city, $30 city, here's a $50 city. So to pick this city would cost you 50. To pick any of the circles out here costs 20, and you can't pick boinker doinkers. Once you select the amount that you're going to bid on a bond, then everybody reveals how much they bid on their bond, and they will be seated in player order based on the amount they bid. I'm bidding on the minor companies here, and I think this is actually more potent than minors. But so the person who bid the most sits on the first seat, and he gets the elephant. And that person has to choose one of his cities that he's chosen. Now, none of those cities have been written down or anything yet. He writes down the name of a city on his bond chart, and he takes a share associated with that city. So, for example, this city is associated with the 4th Railroad, which will be the BNR. Let's make sure that's correct, because they've got some weird crap where they misprinted somehow. Basically, the BNR and the NWR I think are switched on here. I hope it's only on here and not everywhere else. Okay, so here's the BNR, and it says 4 here, and it says 4 here. I mean, it's got to be everywhere else. Okay, so if I write down Nagpur in my paper, I don't let anybody know that. It counts $20 towards the bond that I'm associating, and I get to take a share of this 4th company, just a single share. And I'll have to pay for it later. If I had written down Hyderabad instead on my sheet of paper, I'd still pay $20 because this is just a normal $20 city. But I'd have a choice between either the 4th company or the 6th company. And I could take a share of either. What my opponents know is what shares I'm taking. And they know the size of the bond I've committed to. We go around in order, going from the elephant down to the person to the left of the elephant around the circle. Probably right in a normal game if you move clockwise. But I'll be going counterclockwise, of course. And each person just picks a city, writes it down, and announces what share they're taking, and takes hold of it. Once everybody's done all of this, they seal up their bond announcements along with the cash that they've put aside for these that they've already committed. But you have to keep picking cities until A, you've picked your minimum amount of cities. You must keep picking until you hit the minimum amount of cities, whatever that is. Or if you haven't hit the maximum, and what is it? You have at least $40 left in your bond. Now, if you end up making an illegal bond, there's a penalty for this that's built into the game, and it's totally random and has nothing to do with any of this. Basically, the idea here is don't cheat, but if you do, you can be hammered for it, sort of. All right. Now, one company is special, the BBCI. If this sucker is picked by shares by someone who picks both Bombay and Ajmer, and then it ends up floating in the first stock round or earlier, it'll start as a major corporation with dots in both of these. If that whole sequence does not get combined, if someone does not end up as president who picked both of these two cities for it, or if it doesn't float or something like that, it will forever be a minor company. A minor company, remember, only has one home base, and it'll start up here. How big a deal is that? Hard to tell. It can't grow as quickly, conceivably. But the rules make it sound like there's this huge difference between major and minor corporations. Really, the only thing is the major corporations start with 2 home bases. The major corporations are also restricted from getting certain kinds of trains, these 1M trains. And the minor corporations have a little bonus with these little tiles. But that's about it. Okay. Once everybody's done their contracts, everybody has their shares in front of them, they have to pay for them. What happens if you can't afford them anymore? Because, you made this bid, right? Well, if you can't afford them, they're flipped face down, and you have to buy them as soon as possible in your next stock round that you have that cash. And you cannot buy anything else until you've bought all those shares that you committed to through your bond. which means you kind of want to make sure that you can pay for them all, because you probably need cash to buy more certificates to float your companies. Although maybe not in 6 players, maybe it's not as big a deal. But when we were playing in 2, with the 730 start and 60% required, it was real tough. You had to really kind of, it looks like you could have made any corporation start, but you had to be kind of careful about how you did it. Some of them might require buying a bond from another for another corporation. Okay. So once you buy your shares, we go into a stock round. And this stock round will again start with the guy with the elephant, who will be the same guy. And he can buy a share. He can also sell shares. Now, for the special rule for this stock round, any shares he sells, he can't sell his face down unpurchased shares yet, but any shares that he sells at $5 less than their par value. He's paid par value. He's going to lose money if he took shares on bond and then dumps them into the bank pool. That $5 penalty goes away if you hold it for a turn, though. Selling and sharing stocks, very similar to most XX games. You're allowed to sell as many as you like. You can buy one certificate, one share, actually, not certificate. What's weird here is the presidency's not really assigned at this point, but it may need to be assigned because you may have sold out all your shares just to handle the 2-share thing. So there's kind of this weirdness about how to deal with that. For the most part, the oldest shares, the person holding the shares the longest, who has the mostest shares, will be president. So it follows standard rules for an XX there. It's not assigned until the company floats. The presidency's not officially assigned. And you have to be able to buy single shares. You have to have certificate holdings to buy those single shares. And those certificate holdings are kind of harsh. 11 and 6 players, very much like an 1830 type game. About the same amount of companies, right? 8 companies. So it's probably pretty fair. But you're only allowed to hold 4 shares of any company. So there's a lot more interlocking working together in this than there may be in an 1830 game, I think. Okay. If you sell shares, you can't buy those shares back in that stock round. And in fact, you're not allowed to buy a certificate and then sell it immediately in the same stock action. Okay. To float a company, it has to reach this amount by the end of the stock round. It doesn't matter what's in the bank pool. Those count towards that too. It ends up floating with the full value of all the shares that prospectively could be bought. So these prices are fixed on the corporations, the par values. So this guy has a par of $100. Well, he'll start with $1,000 for all 10 shares, even if only 4 of them sell in the 6-player game. And that gives you a lot of cash to play with. Cash is easy to come by in this game, which you'll see. It is possible for a company not to have a director or president, whatever you want to call it. They're called directors in this game. Because you can sell all your shares. All the shares can be in the bank pool. Someone could only have 1 share, and then they're not the president. At that point, you have to appoint a manager. And the manager is the person with the oldest single share. Or, if no one has a share, it's the person with the elephant, I think. And they're basically allowed to borrow a train and run it. If a director's in a company, they can't borrow a train and run it. They can purchase a train. They're allowed to throw their own cash in to purchase a train at any time, but they're not forced to purchase a train. If you don't have a train, though, your stock value is going to start to plummet, so you probably don't want to be holding those shares unless you're planning on running the company to some extent. Okay. The operating round. This gets kind of complex. So the companies are always going to operate in this order, red down to blue. Major companies are allowed to lay track out of they're two headquarters basically. So, for example, the one company will be able to lay track out of these two spaces. They have to trace back to that headquarters kind of directly. So what they can't do is say hook this up and then lay two track coming forward out of it. And this is only yellow track that can be laid double. It's kind of like an 1870 now. Except that it's coming from the two different headquarters of the company. Now, you have an option of how to handle this. The first option is you're not going to do this until you enter phase 3, which is when the first 3 train comes out. You're just going to lay one track per turn. The other option is that you will take the right, you're willing to pay £20 for most companies in order to lay that second track. An extra £20. And money is cheap in this game, so that's not that bad. The only exception to that is if you're the number one company, it's going to cost you £50 to build that second track. Those are very useful. For example, if you want to hook up the two things of 4, you can build in both directions and get it hooked up more quickly. And that could be very helpful towards meeting your bond requirements, for example. Because you want that cash back as quickly as possible so you can buy track. The BBCI has a special rule. This mountain, well, it would normally cost £70 for narrow gauge and $140 for wide gauge track. If the BBCI decides to go in as a major, ends up going in as a major company, they can build, and this is misprinted in the rules, but they can build, or at least ambiguous at the very least. They can build the track through this space, and it's going to be a city, a station, whatever, which is how they put it. For only $70, as if it were narrow gauge track, even if they play the wide gauge track. Tile promotion has to maintain all track. Mainly, you're going to have to look at this to figure out what you can promote and when. There are some core rules of thumb in it, but I haven't been able to absorb them entirely. Okay, once you hook up your contract, which is basically once you have a track that links all the cities together, regardless of any station tokens, regardless of whether a train can run on that track, and you're allowed to shift even at a place where you couldn't normally shift, like Calcutta. You couldn't shift between trains. Well, I could connect this, and this by running track out here and down here without it ever connecting. You couldn't run a train that way, but it's assumed that you can ship whatever it needs to be done across Calcutta easily enough. So once you make that condition happen, you get all the cash from your bond back. Now that's probably not going to be a lot of cash. It's going to be $100 or so, but you know, that's a share. It's some money that you can definitely use and can be a helpful little boon. And you feel kind of stupid for having thrown it away anyway already, so it's nice to get it back. Station markers work largely as normal. Oh, I forgot to. I think there's a restriction on tile promotion. Yeah. There's a restriction on changing track, upgrading track from, say, yellow to green or likewise, which is that you can only carry it out in the area defined on your little picture, and there's a table that it announces that as well. If the tile is not at present connected to a company base, you can only promote it if it establishes a connection without a braking gauge. But it is important that you're not able to upgrade your track outside your little core operating section. Now that gets relaxed once the first 5 train is bought, but you're at the end stage of the game there. And likewise with tokens. You're not allowed to buy tokens outside your core area until the first 5 train is bought, at which point those will be relaxed. Now, the base tokens work as they do in most XX games, but you can't buy them in a location where your opponent, where some company is yet to be started, and it's one of its home bases. So, for example, I could not build a token in this space ever. That is reserved for the 6. Those tracks actually upgrade, and you can kind of see what they turn into. Some of them are going to turn into these big, this is Calcutta Delhi, turn into these big separate areas. B&M is, what is that? Madras and Bombay over at the ends. Those turn into more natural looking XX cities. And then God knows what this is. This looks like it's a town over here, just doinked out on the end of the track, and I think that's what it is. That's this here, water or something. I have no idea what that... I think it's an extra boinker doinker. Okay. So the bases work as they do in most XX games in terms of being a place where you can run your train from. They can also block other they do block other corporations from running through that space. So where there's a single circle, and if there's a token in there, you're not going to be able to run a train through there. On the other hand, when you get up to these multiple circle ones, both circles have to be filled with a token to prevent somebody else from being able to use them. Now we got these weird little things here which are sort of like roundhouses or something. They don't get a token in them. They don't work as cities, but they do allow you to switch direction in them, and they're just weird. Boinkers can't have dots. When you choose to run your train, again, it's like a normal XX game. You're able to run between one city and another. Well, there's some differences here. So first of all, your train is based on the meter. So you can't use an M train on a wide gauge track, and you can't use wide gauge trains on the narrow gauge track. And that makes a lot of sense. They wouldn't fit. The track, the number on the train is the number of big cities, circles that it connects. Doinkers are all free. You collect the cash for them, for running through them, but you don't have to pay one of your movement points for them, one of your train points. Which means there's this wonderful little 1M train, which can run between one main city and a doinker. And, well, any doinkers in between, it gets to count. The normal trains run between major cities, so a 2 train would run between 2 main cities and collect all doinkers in between. And in fact, it can run beyond the main cities and collect more doinkers that way. They just don't count against it. And then there's bigger trains as you go forward. There's the key standard rules. You can't run on the same track as another train is run. You can't run from one space in the city to another space in the same city, so you can't loop around and try to score that city twice. You can't hit the same city twice by other means, like going through an X, zoom, zoom. But other than those pretty standard rules for an XX, we got some others here. Which is when you're calculating your run. We've already discussed how the boinkers, had to add my plug, how the boinkers don't count against your run. They just add to it. You also have the concept of a mail run. One of your trains picks its two endpoints, and the amount of cash from those two endpoints. So for example, let's say I did Calcutta to Waltair and ran track down there and just had a train hitting those two. I would collect 50, 80 bucks. That goes right into my company treasury. So there's this constant source of cash flowing into the company treasuries, which is important because there's a lot of terrain on the map, to be honest. On the other hand, that may conflict with my desire to hit boinkers beyond my best city. So I could get a good mail run like from here to here, but let's say it also ran through all these boinkers. Well, I could choose to instead do a mail run between here and the boinker for 60, take less money for my mail run, but get more money for my main run. And then I have the normal choice between paying out or swallowing. If I pay out, my dividends, my stock value is going to go up. Now my stock value is going to go up one little square if I pay out anything up to twice the value of the company. But if I pay out more than twice, it goes up 2 spaces. More than 3 times, 3 spaces. All the way up to more than 5 times, where it goes up 5 full spaces. Now what is that more than 5 times? What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is, let's say you're down here at 10 bucks a share and you pay out a total run of 50 bucks. You've just hit that 5 times and you jump 5 spaces. Now next turn I'd be paying 50 bucks. This is only a 57, so that'll only send me forward 1. But it is quite possible to set yourself up with a big swallow for a bigger payout and not lose stock value that way by making jumps forward. And I've seen that happen in 29. I haven't seen that here yet, but it is possible. Okay, the other thing is, if you swallow, you only go back if there's shares in the bank pool. And in fact, this is the only way you lose stock value. Well, if you can't produce any income at all, you go back as well. So there's an interesting set of stock value is very flat in this game, except for those interesting jumps, but you're not able to slam it around by selling it. The only thing that happens is if it's in here, it can't swallow as nicely. Okay. What else do we have here? So if you pay out, it's paid out on a per share basis. Each share is 10% of the company. Shares in the bank pool and in the treasury, they don't pay to anyone. The company doesn't get that money. So you don't have any kind of trying to machinate to keep the shares in the bank pool or to try to get them into the company certificate or anything like that. You're not worried about that. They're either in players' hands or not, and that's the only place they make money. Then you're allowed to buy trains. Trains are the phase changers, as is usual in an XX game. There's some weirdness here. Some trains will not be in the game unless a minor company starts in the first round of the game. If a minor company starts in the first round of the game, we'll be playing with all these trains, and maybe more, because there's an option to get more of these for the minor companies. But a significant number of the lower trains are removed from play if no minor company starts, with the idea that the game is going to be a little bit harsher, a little bit tighter under those circumstances. In order to buy a train, you have to have the cash in your corporation treasury, but you are allowed, I think only if you don't have a train, as the president or director, to throw cash in if the company can't afford the complete train. But you can't use that cash for anything else. The company treasury has to be empty, and it buys the train with all of its money and whatever the director can throw in. Phase changes happen when the first 3 train, 4 train, 5 train, and 6 train are bought. Those changes are actually kind of spelled out here. So the first 2 train bought, well, that's going to allow each company to have 4 trains and yellow tracker built. The first 3 train is built. These are the trains you're allowed to have. Nothing becomes obsolete. You're allowed 4 trains and yellow and green track. The first 4 train is built. Look, the 2 trains and 1 M's all become obsolete. They rust. All 3 colors are available, but you're only allowed 3 different trains. When the first 5 train comes out, I'm sorry, not all 3, all 4 colors, all 3 colors. 3 of the 4 colors, grays aren't available yet. When the first 5 train comes out, now 6s become available for purchase. 6s aren't going to make a phase change. 3s and 2 M's go obsolete, and you're only allowed 2 trains. And that's the end of the line there is the 6th train. Okay. Minor companies have the option at the beginning of the game, assuming that one started at the beginning of the game, to buy these 1M trains instead of the 2 trains. The 2 trains are significantly more expensive. The 1Ms are metered trains. Any company can buy metered trains out of the later sets, but only once the phase has changed. So at the beginning of the game, these will all be face down. Once the first 3 train is bought, the 2 M's become available for anyone to buy. But there's a little cheat here. Every company that's a minor company gets one of these tiles. And once per game, it can expend that tile to buy the next metered train in the progression. Which means if I'm in the 2 trains, I could buy a 2M for its face value, the 250 pounds or whatever. I can just sort of cheat into getting that train onto my company early. That's a nice option. It helps those minor companies to get started where they're not liable to have a lot of track and be able to hit a lot, and they may be falling behind a little bit if they couldn't take that. After each operating round, we push forward. There's going to be, in the different phases, different amounts of operating rounds. That's not specified on these charts, but it is over here. Basically, where do we have? In phase 2, we have 1 operating round. Phase 3, when the first 3 train comes out. When the first 3 train comes out, it'll be in an operating round. After we go through the stock round after that, and we go into the next set of operating rounds, there'll be 2 operating rounds after each stock round. Phase 4, that goes up to 3, and that'll continue for the rest of the game. So you have stock operating, optional operating, second operating if necessary, third operating if necessary. Then we go to the elephant round, where the elephant gets to decide. The person holding the elephant gets to decide, I'll have another operating round. And you just have to run one if that's the case. Okay. Now, when the elephant is assigned, which is as normal by the person to the left or whatever, the next person in line from the person who passed first at the end of the stock round, okay? That person has the option to sell the elephant to anyone. Any agreed upon amount of cash that they have. Presumably other deals could be involved too. I don't know. It doesn't really say there. But presumably. The game will end when the bank runs out of money, or if a company reaches the top value on the stock market. If the bank runs out of money, you keep playing the operating round, I believe. Yeah. But you do not go to the next operating round. You don't play a whole sequence of operating rounds. You just play that one operating round out. Every company will get its shot to go, so they get equal. But if somebody hits the 400 first, the game stops as soon as that company's done with its turn. So other companies will get shafted out of their turn. And then you add up your cash in hand as well as the stock value of your corporations. Nothing else counts. Mm-hmm. Sounds pretty simple. All right. Well, we'll give this a shot and see how it works out. I played it with my wife just as kind of a trial run to see if I could understand the rules in part. And I think I have a fairly good understanding of them. I don't think I like it too much so far. Not so much that... The thing that's killing me is the trackline. It's this conversion chart, dealing with this, trying to figure out what the upgrades are possible and what... It's just too much. There's too many options. I like the simplicity of the track in 1830 so much more. Alright, let's load this one up.